Hello, fellow writers. I am Claudia Mills, and I'm here today to talk to you about my adventure becoming a chapter book author after having been primarily a middle grade author. And so I want to talk about chapter book writing, but also talk about the 5 things that I learned as a chapter book writer, because I think they're valuable things for any writer, but there are things that were more clear to me that emerged with more clarity and precision when I was wrestling with the writing of chapter books. So that's what I want to talk about today. So my first maybe 20 books were middle grade novels, and that's just what I thought I'd always do. And it was my editor who said to me, Claudia, I think you ought to try a chapter book. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with that form, chapter books are those wonderful books that are for readers who are more advanced than the kids who are learning to decode words on the page as they would do in The Cat in the Hat or Frog and Toad, Henry and Mudge, some of these very simple texts that are very short. But what you get in chapter books is books for kids who are not yet ready for middle grade, but are ready for a real substantial story. So they tend to run between maybe 8,000 and 15,000 words. Mine are on the longer end, 15,000 words. They, in published form, they might have 100 pages, always divided into chapters because they're called chapter books. My books tend to have about 10 chapters to form a 100-page book. In manuscript, though, it's more like 70 pages. So the chapters might be 6 or 7 pages long. They have black and white line illustrations, so because kids still want to look at the pictures. And sometimes there's one per book per chapter, and sometimes there's lots of spot illustrations throughout. So my editor said, I think you should try a chapter book. And chapter books, for the age range, it zeroes in on 3rd grade. Almost always the protagonist is 8. There's just this sweet spot of 8 that is the heart of the chapter book. And so I wrote my book 7 times 9 equals trouble, which is about the 3rd grade rite of passage of learning to master those pesky times tables, those multiplication facts that every kid needs to learn. And that became my first chapter book, and actually my most successful chapter book, my most successful book, period, if you measure in terms of sales. It's sold more copies than the rest put together. So yay for chapter books. So I want now, though, to talk about some of the things I learned through writing chapter books that are going to be helpful, I hope, to you for whatever you write. So the title of my talk is 5 Things I Learned About Writing by Venturing into Chapter Books. So number 1 is the importance of connecting with actual child experiences. Because this kind of writing just has this intense focus on 8, 1 year out of the whole span of a child's life, looking at it so closely, you really want to get inside the heart and mind of an 8-year-old, of a 3rd grader. And I think this is applicable because we always want to get inside the head of whatever character we're writing about. But I had a special opportunity working with chapter books to really mine the memories I had from my past and things that happened to my children too, and that happened to their friends. So I wrote 7 times 9 after consciously brainstorming everything I could remember about 3rd grade. And what I came up with was times tables. It was an important thing for me, but for my boys, it was enormously important because in their school, you had to memorize and pass a timed test on each one of the 12 times tables by a certain date. And if you did, you got an ice cream cone. But if you didn't, there was no ice cream cone for you. And my older son was the last kid in the class to get the ice cream cone. So it was a family trauma that left us all deeply scarred. And I thought, I'm going to write a book about this. And I'm going to ask you in a moment to start brainstorming about your own past, focusing on that 3rd grade year, and in particular looking for things that aren't just like generic things. And maybe if I just said times tables, that's generic. But if I think about times tables and you're the last kid in the class to get that ice cream cone, and how it feels as you watch all the others, you're looking away at their ice cream cone, which isn't even a very good ice cream cone, but it's still something that they're getting and you're not, that's going to make it more vivid to you. And try to think about some of these things that nobody could make up because they're just, I think, what teenagers call random. I mean, they're just these things that have this reality to them because they actually did happen. So like when I was in 3rd grade, our teacher loved square dancing. She'd push the desks aside and she'd have us square dance with each other. And she'd have boy ask girl square dances. This is in 3rd grade, and girl ask boy square dances. And I had a crush on this boy, Chris Ruff. And when it was the girl ask boy square dance, I raced up to him to ask him to dance. But Claire Haslinger also raced up to him. So there he was, confronted by the two of us, eager to square dance with him. And to choose between us, he made us each hold out our hands so he could feel our hands and see whose hands were drier, because he didn't want to square dance with anyone with sweaty, clammy hands. Well, again, you can't make up something like that. It's just, so I haven't ever put that into a book, but you know, one of these days there's going to be a 3rd grade square dance somewhere in something that I write. And I taught a workshop once on chapter book writing where I had people brainstorm 3rd grade and share things. And one student had this that I thought was the most perfect thing for chapter book ever. When she was in 3rd grade, her teacher loved dolphins, and the little girls in the class all adored this teacher. So they all started to have this competition for who could love dolphins the most to be worthy of the teacher's special affection. So with dolphin t-shirts and dolphin headbands and dolphin paraphernalia of all kinds. So the idea of a competition among 3rd graders for who could love dolphins most to equal the teacher's love of dolphins is just the kind of experience I want you to focus in on. So I'm going to ask you to pause this for a minute, get a paper and pen or pencil, and just list as many things as you can about 3rd grade, about being 8, about that magical year. Okay. Ready, set, go. All right, I'm back and you're back. So let's turn to my second thing on the list. So first thing is the importance of really connecting with the childhood experience. The second thing, so that was the importance of connecting with experience, the importance of structure. Chapter books put such a premium on structure because they have all the complexity really of a full-length novel, and yet it all has to be distilled into many fewer words and pages. So you have a clear chance to see what the structure is. And so it makes it visible and allows you to really understand the importance of structure in a story. So here are some of the things that I came to appreciate about structure from writing chapter books that, again, that I think are more broadly applicable. So in a chapter book, it's short. You can only have 10 chapters, and each chapter only has 5, 6, 7 pages. In that first chapter, you want to have a clear definition of the problem of the book. You want the reader to know at the end of that chapter, what is this book about? Where is this book going? What is the main thing that my character wants? And what is the main obstacle toward him getting it? That is going to be the central dramatic question that drives your story. And I like it if, I have this little bugaboo about this, if that heart of the story, what the story is about, can be distilled into one sentence placed at the end of the first paragraph. I like to, not the first paragraph, the first chapter, at the end of the first chapter, where it has that feeling of you settle in. Now I know what this book is about. And so I'm going to show you a couple of examples from my books, just because they're the ones I know the structure the best, because that's where I wrestle with the structure. So 7 times 9 equals trouble. In the first chapter, Wilson gets a note home to his parents about his lagging performance on the times tables. He also, though, has the chance to take home the classroom hamster squiggles for the weekend. So he's so excited about this, but it looks like the weekend may be ruined by having to spend a lot of time on math with his parents. And so here's how the first chapter ends. It would have been the proudest moment of Wilson's 3rd grade year, except for Mrs. Porter's note in his backpack. 1 note plus 10 more times tables would equal 3 weeks of nothing but trouble. So that is the way that story has its central problem click into place. This is how Oliver Olsen changed the world. It's a book that I wrote because I went to a school, and I'm always looking, remember, for the real. I'm always looking for that way of connecting with child experience directly. So school visits are great for that, because I don't ever get the chance to forget what it's like to be a third grader, because there they are right in front of me. And in this school, the kids had an assignment for coming up with an idea for how they could change the world. And all their ideas were posted there. So I was taking notes frantically, writing down the best and the funniest and the most poignant ideas for how a kid would change the world. So I knew I was going to write a book about this. And I knew that my main character had to be the kid who was most unlikely to change the world, because that's how you're going to get the strongest story. So Oliver was going to be not at all likely to change the world. And at the time, I was such an overprotective parent, and my closest friend was an overprotective parent on steroids. And so I thought Oliver's going to have one of those helicopter moms who's just not going to let him change the world, let alone come up with an idea of his own about changing it. So the book takes place during the time when Oliver is studying space, and the book opens with Oliver Olson looked up at the moon. The large inflated ball hung on a string from the ceiling in Mrs. O'Neill's third grade classroom, because they're starting their study of space. And the study of space is going to include the third grade space sleepover, where the kids come to school and spend the whole night at the school looking at planets through a telescope and watching a movie. And he knows his mom is never going to let him go. And so the first chapter ends. Oliver looked up and scowled, as if it were somehow the moon's fault that he'd never get to see it through a real telescope. All he'd ever see was that stupid inflated ball dangling from the classroom ceiling. So, distilling that crucial story problem in the first chapter and putting it in a crisp one-sentence statement. Consider the value of doing that. My second thing I learned about structure, and this is still part of my second big point for this talk, is there's not a lot of space in a chapter book, so everything that's there has to earn its keep. You can't just stick stuff in for gratuitous fun. Gratuitous fun is great. We're going to talk in a minute about gratuitous fun and how great it is, but it can't be gratuitous fun. It can be fun that would have earned its keep being gratuitous in a longer book, but here we want that gratuitous fun to actually end up having a purpose in the story, actually playing some role. Everything, if your character has a sibling, if a character has a pet, they need to have some role in the story, not just being, adding a little texture to the life of the family. They need to play a role. And what I do when I work on a chapter book is halfway through, I look back at the first half and everything that emerged there in the writing. I have an outline, but it's never all that detailed. And as I'm writing, the magic happens on the page, where all these things start to pop into my head and pop out of my pen onto the page. And then I go back and I look at what I have. And everything that I have now needs to play a role in the second half of the book. If it's in the first half of the book, it has to be in the second half of the book. That's my rule for myself. And so here's a couple of examples from Kelsey Green, Reading Queen. Kelsey Green, Reading Queen. Kelsey's a third grader trying to win a third grade reading contest. And the book opens with Kelsey reading under her desk during math class because she loves to read so much. I chose that moment because I was trying to establish Kelsey as an avid reader. And then when the reading contest comes, we're going to know exactly how much this means to Kelsey. And in fact, winning starts to mean so much to Kelsey that she's going to read a lot more often during math class too. Well, believe it or not, it never occurred to me that if in the first half of the book I have Kelsey reading all the time during math class when she's not supposed to be reading, what do I need to have in the second half of the book? Kelsey has to get caught. Of course she has to get caught. Anton Chekhov, the playwright, has a famous adage about the theater. He says, if there is a gun over the mantle in Act 1, it has to go off in Act 3. And other things happen too, like I have the principal come to their class and mention that the third graders have a good chance this year because the best fifth grade reader is going to be on vacation for a week. And so, they may have a chance here. Well, I just had that pop into the principal's head and he says it. But you don't mention a character just once in a chapter book or in any book. If you mention the character once, they have to be there twice at least. And so at some point I thought Kelsey is going to have to actually meet the famous fifth grade reader. So make sure that you make use of all the gifts you've given yourself. Go hunt for those gifts. Those are gifts that the muses, the writing goddesses gave you. And now they're yours to show how much you appreciate by giving them their full value in the story. So also think in terms of scenes. In an ordinary book, and a scene is a segment of action that takes place in real time. It's not just something we summarize. We're actually watching it unfold. And something has to happen in a scene. That's the sort of crucial mark of a scene, is that something happens. Now, if you're writing a longer book, you might have 5 pages where nothing really happens. The character thinks a lot. The character chats with a friend. But in a chapter book, you don't have room to have 5 pages, which is a whole entire chapter where nothing happens. So I spend a lot of time thinking about scenes and how I can create a scene that'll have some interest in its own right, but also move the story forward. So going back to Kelsey again, Kelsey Green, Reading Queen, her biggest problem is not that she's going to get caught reading during math. Her biggest problem is that there's another kid in her class, Simon Ellis, who is actually reading more books than Kelsey. And Kelsey doesn't think that's possible. Nobody could love reading as much as she does. I mean, nobody. So she and her 2 best friends, Annika, who loves math, and Izzy, who loves running, start asking themselves whether Simon Ellis is actually reading all the books he says he's reading. And they form a top secret cheater catcher plan where they're going to use their talents, Annika's talent in math, Izzy's talent in running, and Kelsey's talent in reading, to find out once and for all if Simon is cheating. And so I have 3 attempts there. We have Annika using her math to try to figure out if it's mathematically possible, humanly possible for Simon to read X number of pages in X number of minutes, given the average reading time of a very fast reader. And we have Izzy using her running talents to do a spy mission. And spy missions, of course, add interest to a story. And also, if the kid's caught, which, spoiler alert, she is, that adds interest too. So I had that kind of a chance to add structure there. Or in Oliver Olsen, how Oliver Olsen changed the world, where he's studying space and trying to stand up to his helicopter parents. He starts to break free from them when he and a classmate, Crystal, who's a force to be reckoned with, decide to make a protest diorama on behalf of Pluto, who's been excluded from the solar system. They're going to have the little planet Pluto outside the shoebox with a little sign saying, "Let me in." So that is what they're going to be working on together. And I have scenes of them working on the diorama at Oliver's house, where his mother controls everything, and at Crystal's house, where nobody controls anything. And I decided that every time I'm going to have 3 scenes where something bad happens to little Pluto. At Crystal's house with all the chaos, her dog eats Pluto. At Oliver's house with his mother hovering and cleaning up frantically as the kids are trying to work, she throws Pluto away, and then Pluto does disappear for a 3rd time at the end. So I think in terms of the premium that you place on scenes as self-contained unit of action that is interesting in its own right, but also contributes to the larger story. And finally here, in terms of the importance of structure, in chapter books, you really notice the beauty and the value of coming full circle and having everything come back at the end to where it was in the beginning. And so in Oliver Olsen, remember, it begins with him looking up at the moon, and then this crucial last line of the 1st chapter is with him glaring at the moon because he thinks he's never going to get to go to the space sleepover. Well, he does get to go to the space sleepover, and that's the final chapter of the book. Mrs. O'Neill turned down the lights to show the Star Wars movie. Oliver could still see the dim shapes of the planets hung from the ceiling in their classroom. Perfectly content, Oliver lay there and smiled up at the moon. And in 7 times 9 equals trouble, where the 1st chapter ends with him thinking about the note home, where he's thinking 1 note plus 10 more times tables would equal 3 weeks of nothing but trouble. By the end of the book, he has passed those times table tests. He did get his ice cream cone. The classroom hamster escaped, and Wilson was the one who found him. And Wilson also ended up getting a hamster of his own for him and for his annoying little brother Kipper, who's plays an important role in several ways throughout the story. And the final line of the book is 2 brothers times 1 hamster of their own equal happiness. Well, I want to turn now to the third thing that I learned from writing chapter books, the importance of connecting with a child's experience, the importance of structure, but then the really fun one, the importance of sparkle, the importance of having these moments where you have such a clear perception of a child and what the child thinks and feels and misunderstands, that anyone reading this book would say, this is an author who knows a child. In the Ramona books, which aren't really chapter books because they were published before that was a publishing category, and they're much longer than chapter books tend to be, but they still focus on a young child's mind. Ramona Quimby, when she's in kindergarten, the first day of kindergarten, Miss Binney reads the story to them, Mike Mulligan and his steam shovel, where Mike Mulligan and the steam shovel, Mary Ann, tunnel down to build the foundation of for the new town hall, and it takes them all day. Well, in the class, one child raises his hand and says, where did Mike Mulligan go to the bathroom? And the teacher doesn't know what to say, so she goes, well, that wasn't an important part of the story. Well, the children all know it was a very important part of the story, so that moment where we understand a child's mind. And she has the famous line in that book, where Ramona, who's learning the national anthem, thinks it's a song about the dawn's early light. And so when she goes home, she wants to talk about the dawn's and doesn't even understand what the words of a song mean. So this very crystalline distillation of a child's sensibilities. So here's a moment from Clementine, because I know a lot about how I structured my books, but for sparkle, I just want to go to some of the sparkliest little moments in all of literature that you find in children's chapter books. So this is Clementine by Sarah Pennypacker. Clementine is this mile a minute filled with bad ideas that always get her into trouble kind of girl. And she just can't stop peppering adults with questions. And she's here in the principal's office and she's talking about chimpanzees and orangutans. And then she says, also, I've been wondering what the difference is between smashed and crashed. Mrs. Rice handed me her dictionary. And then suddenly I didn't want to know anymore. That is the miracle about dictionaries. This is a person who knows a child's mind. I love the Lulu books by Hilary McKay. Lulu is famous for animals, and Lulu in every book has a deep connection with some animal. And in Lulu and the Rabbit Next Door, it's actually a very poignant story. The boy next door has a rabbit he doesn't love or care about. It's a boring rabbit. Who wants a rabbit? He wants, something much more loud and exciting than a rabbit. But Lulu and her cousin love rabbits, and Lulu has a rabbit, Thumper, and they can't bear the unhappiness that this rabbit has, living trapped in this home where he's not appreciated. And the first chapter, just to see that clicking into place line, George, the boy's rabbit, gets to come out like for 1 hour a week while his cage is cleaned. And he leaps and high into the air. He ran until he had to stop, panting so hard his sides went in and out. Then Arthur would pick him up and put him back inside his hutch to sit there for another week. It was more than Lulu and Melly could bear. Whoa. I mean, this is a story about animal abuse and neglect, but it's told in such a gentle and beautiful way for a third grade audience. And so they find ways to make Arthur come to appreciate his rabbit. And it culminates in a birthday party that Lulu and Melly are giving for Thumper, to which George, the other rabbit, is invited. And here's the invitation. Dear George, please come to my birthday party tomorrow, because tomorrow is probably my birthday. It is at 3 o'clock, love from Thumper. P.S. It is not one of those parties where you don't bring presents. Again, here's someone who knows the mind of a child. Ivy and Bean are stories absolutely filled with sparkle, and Annie Barrows, the author of these, she can make a story out of absolutely nothing. The whole premise of this book is that Ivy, this is Ivy and Being Bound to Be Bad. It is the 5th book in the series. Ivy has heard about St. Francis of Assisi and how he was so saintly that a wolf would follow him down the street and birds would perch on his head. So she wants to be so good so that wolves will follow her and birds will flock to her. And so she tries very hard to be good, but it isn't working out. And so she decides that what she's going to have to do is up the goodness game. Better than being good is reforming someone bad. And so her best friend Bean is going to have to be as bad as possible so that Ivy can reform her. And the worst thing that Bean can think of doing, she says to Ivy, "What's bad?" "Bad words," Ivy said instantly. So Bean is going to say the worst words she knows. But first Ivy says to her, "No, I beg you, Bean, not to say that terrible word. Promise you won't." And finally now she's going to say the bad word. And here's the worst word that she knows: bra. Okay, so this is Sparkle. Oh, and I guess I'll just give a little bit of this of my best Sparkle from 7 times 9 equals trouble. Remember, the premise of the story is, will Wilson learn his times tables in time to get the promised ice cream cone? And so far it hasn't worked out. What if he couldn't pass all his times table tests by Friday? He imagined himself finishing up in a couple of years when he was a huge hulking 5th grader, practically a grown man. His ice cream cone would still be sitting forgotten in a corner of the freezer. He could almost see it, frozen in a solid block of ice formed from thousands of ice cube trays dripping on it over the years, unless by then the custodian had thrown it away. So my little glimpse into a child's mind who feels not only sorry for himself, but sorry for his ice cream cone. So what I want to do now is give you another little break in the talk, just a few moments to think about examples you can think of Sparkle. Now, this may be a difficult thing to do. I have to say, for me, I never stick my Sparkle in. The Sparkle just sort of emerges as I write. But I think you might want to prime your Sparkle pump by just thinking of little moments, if you're parents, of something that your child said that was just so ridiculous and so real and so wonderful and so insightful, and something that only a 3rd grader or a kindergartner or a 5th grader would say. That's the kind of thing that Sparkle is. So you can think about something like misunderstanding something, the way Ramona misunderstands the Donzer, or little things that grown-ups do, like telling your friends that this is a birthday party where you don't bring presents, and you're thinking, what do you mean a birthday party where you don't bring presents? The little tiny moments of frustration in a child's life, they're so small but can be so piercing. The little tiny moments when someone laughed at you for something silly that now we can see as silly. The Sparkle moments, they can be poignant. Like, it's poignant to me when Wilson is thinking about his poor ice cream cone, but it's also silly and it's sweet. So I'm going to give you put this on pause and take as much time as you need just to kind of turn on your little Sparkle machine and see what Sparkle you can spray into the air for possible use in future stories. All right, well, welcome back for those of you who took the break. And so we've had the importance of connecting with the real life experiences of a child. We've had the importance of structure, and we've had the importance of Sparkle. And for me, for a long time, structure plus Sparkle was all I needed, I thought, to write a chapter book. But then I started to see some manuscripts that I thought weren't satisfying, and I thought they were missing the 3rd key component here, which isn't alliterative because it doesn't start with S, but structure plus Sparkle plus vulnerability. If our character doesn't have some vulnerability, then the book becomes more just slapstick and sitcom. And as we put all the Sparkle in, it starts to feel like glitter, I guess, it starts to feel superficial. We need to feel the characters' vulnerability. And the vulnerability can be about something very small, like being the only kid in the class who doesn't pass the times tables and is singled out as not getting that not very good ice cream cone that the other kids are all getting. And vulnerability is how Lulu's heart just aches when she sees that rabbit there. And Kelsey, I don't know if my Kelsey has enough vulnerability really, now that I'm thinking about it. But Kelsey she's defined herself as being a reader. This is who she thinks she is. And if she's not going to win this contest, she's going to have to sort of rethink her whole way of conceiving of herself. It matters not just to win a prize, but it matters to be affirmed by the world for who you are. And Oliver, to have parents who have no confidence at all in your ability to go forth makes you feel so diminished. And to have that moment where you actually can say to your parents, I want to go to the space sleepover, and talk them into it. So think a lot about vulnerability here. I phrase it this way, like, ask yourself, what is the hole in my character's heart? And what can happen in this story to fill that hole? And I think we see like the vulnerability emerge really powerfully in Clementine. Clementine, as I said, is the one who's always in trouble for everything. And she has this friend, Margaret, who's sort of an expert on everything. And Margaret refers to Clementine's younger brother as the easy one. I squint-eyed her. The easy ones? The easy one? That's what my mother calls him. She says it's a good thing your parents got an easy one after you. Same thing in my family, but I'm the easy one. She says when there are two kids in a family, there's always an easy one and a hard one. I guess it's a rule. Okay, this is also sparkle, because the way kids would think of it as a rule, that there's always an easy one and a hard one, and the way the kids fasten on parental sayings as gospel authority. Well, Clementine has been in trouble throughout the book, and she overhears part of a conversation where the word good riddance is used, and where her parents say, we only need one. And she thinks, we only need one. We only need the easy one. We don't need me. And there's going to be a party. And is it going to be a party for a birthday? But it's nobody's birthday. Is it going to be a goodbye party? Maybe. If my parents were having a party and I didn't know about it, that meant it was a surprise party. Surprise parties are either for birthdays or going aways. It wasn't my birthday anymore. And so now comes the moment where Clementine just lets pour out of her heart everything that's been troubling her. I'm sorry, and I won't be like this anymore. Like what, Clementine? My mom asked. What are you talking about? Like whatever you don't want, I said. I won't talk so much, and I'll clean up my room for real, and I will think about the consequences before I do stuff, and I won't do stuff anyway, and I will never lose my homework because I will never lose anything. And I will sit so still you will think, hey, is that Clementine or just a statue of Clementine? And I will never bring another note home that says, Clementine had a difficult day at school. And I will bring hundreds of notes home that say, wow, Clementine certainly pays attention in school. And the underneath of my bed will look like the underneath of normal people's beds. And my hands will always be where they belong. And I will take piano lessons again, but this time I will sit on the bench the whole time. And then I ran out of air. I took a big gulp. Then I won't be like me anymore. And then I'll be the easy one. So you don't have to get rid of me, which I know about because I heard you say one's all we need. And then I heard you order a cake that says goodbye and good riddance, Clementine. Well, I'm crying now just reading this. This is a kid who you might have thought didn't have much vulnerability because she's the one who's always, putting down the banana peel for someone else to slip on. But it turns out the cake is because she's helped her father, who's sort of a building manager kind of custodian, deal with these pigeons that have been pooping all over the front of the building. And so the cake says goodbye and good riddance. Thank you, Clementine, hero of the Great Pigeon War. So vulnerable. So structure, sparkle, vulnerability. And I'll close with just saying the final thing I learned about chapter books was the importance of allowing myself to try something new. Yeah, I thought I was a middle grade novelist, and I tried one chapter book, and I thought, where have you been all my life? Chapter books. I love you. I love you. I love you. So I discovered, first of all, I learned a lot of things I could apply to middle grade, but I also learned that I loved a whole other different kind of writing. And now I'm working right now on my very first verse novel, and I'm loving it. I don't know if it's any good. I don't know if it's ever going to get published, but I know that I'm trying something new. And I think some of the things, maybe I'll give my next talk on what I learned about writing in general from venturing on a verse novel. So I wish you all joy in your writing journeys, um, and consider chapter books as a possibility. Bye-bye.